Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Timpley from the International Food Safety and Quality Network. Hello again and welcome to edition 40 of Food Safety Fridays. I'm delighted to say today's guest speaker is Britta Ball. Britta's been a previous presenter and we're really looking forward to today's webinar, which is about tips to measure food safety culture and food safety behaviour. Now, food safety culture is a risk factor. Have you considered that before? No matter what resources you use to implement your food safety system, how much you put into it, people can make or break it. And a food safety culture, we all have one, and it can range from strongly negative to strongly positive. So what's yours like? And what can we do to make it more positive? In this webinar today, you will learn what influences food safety culture, approaches to measuring food safety culture and food safety behaviour. They are different things, food safety culture and behaviour. Leading and lagging indicators and factors to consider when implementing changes to improve food safety culture and behaviour in your workplace. I'd like to say today, as I always do, thanks to all the speakers who take part in Food Safety Fridays and share their knowledge with you, as Britta is doing today, and to the sponsors, Safe Food 360, Metal Toledo, Trace Analytics, and FSSC 22000. They help to bring these webinars to you free of charge and provide you with free learning and a free certificate of attendance each week. So thank you to the speakers and the sponsors, and thank you to Britta, and hello, Britta, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm fine. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, your webcam, you've got a new webcam, haven't you? And you're looking good.
Let me just put there, how's that? That should...
oh, no, you've
I got to change something. There, how's that?
Yeah, stay like that, stay like that. I was just saying you've got a new webcam and it's looking lovely, so bright and crisp. So whereabouts are you? Just let the ladies and gents know where you are in the country.
I'm in Canada near Toronto.
Toronto, Canada, and I'm in Manchester, UK. So we're connecting with you all, from all over the world today. So if you want to get your presentation ready, Britta, I'll talk about next week's webinar. I'll be back to you shortly. Okay. Great. Next week, ladies and gents, we have Kathy Crawford, a new presenter. She's Vice President of the HACCP Consulting Group, and Kathy is going to be talking to us about the FDA sanitary transportation regulations. These are the new FDA regulations that came out of the Food Safety Modernization Act. The webinar will include the types of hazards that can occur. Sorry, the webinar will include an overview of the new regulations, as well as recommendations on how to meet the 4-hour training requirements for carriers. Topics in the webinar include the types of hazards that can occur, expected control measures, pre-trip, in transit and post-trip, sanitation, maintenance and pest control requirements, incident management, security and defense requirements, and regulatory requirements for records and communication. So if you have to comply with this new regulation, then you really must attend this webinar. Even if you don't, I'm sure you'll learn one or two things. So we'd like to see you anyway. Just to let you know, today's webinar, as always, is being recorded. We send to all registered attendees within 24 hours an email with the webinar recording video, the PowerPoint slides from today, and also the certificate and various other links to bits and bobs. So don't worry if you have to dash away, get called away, miss a bit, you crash your internet connection or whatever. Don't worry, it's being recorded and you'll get everything, so not to worry about that. We've got some polls and some questions, so we've got some interaction today that we'd like you to take part with. Let's have some good chat and some comments and questions. Apart from that, I'll be back later from the Q&A and we'll be over to Britta. Over to you now, Britta.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Simon. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about tips to measure food safety culture and food safety behavior. So I'll give you a little bit about my background. I'm a food scientist from a number of years ago. I started my undergraduate program at the University of Guelph in dairy science. And from there, I worked in a number of places in I worked at Gailey Foods. I worked at Kraft Foods. I worked in dairy plant and dairy farm inspection. And then I moved to the Kemptville College, which is now part of the University of Guelph, where I taught a milk quality and processing course, and communications and some other things. I later got involved with the Ontario government and was in leadership and organization development for about 15 years. And I wanted to get back into my food science. I was always interested in food science, food safety. And I decided to return to school to do a master's in food safety and quality assurance, and then a PhD at the same time. And that's what I did, was I focused my work on the factors that influence employees to follow food safety management systems. So since then, I've worked at Food Banks Canada. I'm actually contracted to be their food safety specialist for Food Banks Canada. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Guelph, and I've got a consultancy, my own consultancy, where I focus on food safety culture, training, and leadership. So that just gives you a little bit of a background about me. So what this particular webinar is about is I wanted to give you a food safety culture in a bit of a context in order to talk to you about measuring culture and measuring behavior. So the things that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the current situation, some of the food safety in the news, food safety culture in the news, and some definitions just to clarify what it is that we're talking about. Then I'm going to go into talking about some factors influencing culture and climate, and I'll explain climate a little bit later. Then talking about measuring the culture and behavior, and then implementing change, because we can measure things, but if we're not going to make use of that information, then there's no point in gathering it in the first place in a setting that we're talking about. So what we want to have is we want to have a baseline. You measure it first, you get a baseline, and then you identify areas you want to make improvements in, and then you make some intervention, you make the improvements, and then you measure it to see what changes. So that's why we want to talk about implementing change. So as Simon mentioned, all food companies have a food safety culture. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to say, oh, well, we've got a food safety culture. Well, everyone has one. It could be a bad food safety culture. It could be a good food safety culture. So ideally, everybody wants to be moving towards a strong, positive food safety culture and building that so that it's at its best. So in the past bunch of years that we've been able to get information on the news, and they talk about food safety culture. Before that, they didn't talk about food safety culture. They really talked about just outbreaks. So we've, since, in the past 10, 15 years, we talk about culture. And so here are examples of how culture has made a difference to food safety. And Tudor's Butcher Shops was in Wales, where there was a young boy who died from E. coli because of the culture of food safety that was in that particular operation. Peanut Corporation of America had an interesting culture related to food safety, and just last year, the owners of that company were sentenced to a long time in jail because of the work that they did in compromising the food safety in the peanut products that they were selling. DeCoster eggs, there was some huge numbers, I forget exactly the numbers, where there was 500,000 or 1 million some odd eggs that were recalled. And XL Foods in Canada was another situation where it was clearly there was a culture of food safety that was not very strong. It was weak. Well, actually, it was strong. It was strong but negative, and that was the problem with XL Foods. I talked more about XL Foods in a previous webinar, so you can actually go to one of the previous webinars to get a little bit more detail about that. And XL Foods got sold to JBS Canada, which is a Brazilian company, and a year later they still had issues. So it was clearly the culture of the organization, within the organization, that was causing the problems. Changing the name of the company doesn't change the culture of the company. More recently in the United States, there's a Chipotle Mexican Grill has had a number of outbreaks, and they focused on natural foods and fresh and local, but there wasn't much talk about food safety. So the emphasis did not at all seem to be on food safety. Now they're promoting, oh yes, we do things, we're as safe as we ever were, and I would be a little bit concerned about that. But that just is an example of how a culture can influence the lack of food safety practices. And there are some questions about Bluebell ice cream, which had a listeriosis outbreak, and there was listeria in the product for a while. Now the Department of Justice in the United States is investigating that. So we're not sure what's going on there, but there's a question. My question is, well, so what does that tell me about the culture that organization had? There is some positive news about culture. And so the reason I want to tell you about the negative ones is because those are the ones that are mostly in the news. But Maple Leaf Foods in Canada was in the news because in 2008 there was a listeriosis outbreak where 23 people died, and Maple Leaf had always prided itself in its practices and the quality and safety of its foods. And then there was this outbreak, and so obviously there was a situation that needed to be corrected. Maple Leaf Foods did some good work and is doing good work now, moving forward, and has been improving the food safety culture, and is taking a lead now in the food industry with respect to food safety and food safety culture. And so this is an example I think that we can turn to, and when we want to look for good examples of food safety culture, we can go, that are in the public realm. We can go to places like Maple Leaf Foods. So some of the challenges, though, that we face with respect to this is we really don't know what food safety culture is. Food safety culture, the phrase, is used in different ways by different people at different times. As I mentioned, I mean, some people seem to think that food safety culture means that you've got a positive food safety culture, but it's a culture, and so we need to be clear about what it is that we're talking about. So I'm going to start with just a little bit on definitions, and so with respect to these definitions, I'm just going to cover safe food, food safety, and food safety culture. And I'm just going to, you're not going to notice this, I hope. I just have to make a change in my screen so that I can see something. Did that change anything, Simon? I think we should be good. All right.
Good. All fine, yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I just needed to change something on my screen so that I could see what was happening here. So, all right. So I'm going to talk about safe food, food safety, and food safety culture. Where'd my screen share go? There we go. I'm back on. I wasn't ever off. You just didn't know that I couldn't see what was happening here. All right. So what I'm going to start with, simple definitions, and I'm going to just give those to you. These, I'm hoping there's not going to be any controversy about that. So safe, we basically divide things up. So we simplify everything. So we come up with the word safe. So safe means, I've determined, I went to the dictionary, Merriam-Webster says not threatening danger. So it doesn't have any threat of danger, it's harmless. So then if I put safe in front of food, then I would say that that's food that's harmless or free from potentially harmful levels of or amounts of hazards or substances that could cause harms. Now there are strengths and weaknesses to this definition, because one could say, well, what about raw meat? Is raw meat safe? Well, it depends on how you want to decide that. But I just want to put forward this as as an example of what we mean by safe food that's harmless, free from potentially harmful levels of things, of hazards, biological, physical, chemical. And then we can, and then if we can agree on that, then we're good. So if we're all good on that, then we can go forward then with what we might mean by food safety. So now I'd like you to just reflect on what you think food safety means, because let me just go back. So we talk about safe food, food safety culture. And I'm breaking it down. So we start with safe food. Now we go to food safety. So we have to decide on what food safety is before we can talk about food safety culture. So if you reflect and say, all right, what is food safety? So I will then go to say, well, Frank Yanis talks about food safety equals behavior. And his new book out, 2015, Food Safety Equals Behavior. There's 30 proven techniques to enhance employee compliance with food safety. That's a really good read, a lot of good tips in it, so I would recommend that. But with respect to our definition of food safety, equal behavior, it's not going to quite work for us in this. So when we talk about food safety, we use it as a noun or noun phrase, technically, a condition or distinguishing attribute or characteristic of food that's unlikely to cause harm, risk, or injury. Go back to the previous definitions about safe and safe food. And it's also a scientific discipline, like the university offers a program in food safety. Then there's another element to it, and this is where it comes back in when we're talking about food safety culture. So it's a noun modifier. Food safety, that phrase food safety, can also modify a noun. And that noun that we're going to be talking about is food safety, is culture. So we can talk about food safety practices, food safety program, food safety culture, or practices for food safety, program in food safety, culture of food safety. That's how it modifies a noun. So now we come to food safety plus culture. So we have that idea of what food safety is. And now we need to look at the word culture, because this is part of where our confusion happens with when we talk about food safety culture. So whose definition do we use? So a simple definition is by Bauer in 1966. And Frank Yanis referred to that more recently. He likes it because it's simple. It's simple in that food safety culture means that it's the way we do things around here in a food business. And so the food safety culture, the way we do things around here could be that we do things incorrectly on purpose. We do things fraudulently. That could be our food safety culture. Or we do things as well as we can to the best of our ability to make sure that our food is safe for our consumers and to make sure that our business is going to be around for a long time. So that's what we mean by the way we do things around here. And then we can think about culture in terms of what some social scientists are using it as. And Frank Yanis has actually said that when we talk about food safety culture, we need to blend the food science with the social science. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to be missing out on things. And so when we go to this Hofstede guy, he says culture is a collective programming of the human mind. And basically that's how we are programmed, how our minds are programmed as we grow up, as we're influenced from a national culture, how we're influenced by our society, from an organizational culture, how we are influenced by those around us in our business, in our workplace. And so that's what we would mean by culture. Edgar Schein, who's a guru in organizational culture, he talks about it being a pattern of shared basic assumptions that people learned to solve problems because there were situations and they said, oh, I think I can figure this one out and we'll do it this way. And then they teach those patterns of how we operate. They teach that to new members coming in. And I can give you an example of one of the plants that I was at, and I did an interview with I did an interview with these, interviewed the 3 levels: the worker, the food safety quality assurance manager, and the owner operator. And the FSQA coordinator said, oh yeah, she trained these new people. She trained the new guys. They were this new guy. He was doing all of the right things the right way. He was doing everything that she explained to them. But within 2 weeks, he was doing everything just the way everybody else was doing it on the line. And that's because he was a team member on the line, and he was loyal to the team members, and the team members were showing him how to do things. So that's what we mean by culture. That's how the pattern of shared basic assumptions that people have, they will teach it to new members. And Shine talks about a couple of different levels: the visible levels, the artifacts, what we can see. And so those would be things hanging on the walls, organizational structures. For example, the organizational structure that Maple Leaf Food has now is that there is a senior vice president of operations who is also the chief food safety officer. So that tells me something really significant about the commitment that Maple Leaf Food has to food safety, because the vice president of operations is the chief food safety officer, the chief food safety guy. There's no disagreement about food safety and operations because it's all one person. That's significant. It also, there's another level where we talk about things, and what are the stories that are told and reinforced within the organization. And then the do part, that's the way we do things. In a previous webinar, I talked about subcultures, and you can go to that. That was the other webinar I did on food safety culture. And so I talked about subcultures, that they're within a business. You can have generic subcultures, and each subculture will have a different idea about how to do things. So the executives they focus on profit. Operations focuses on getting things out the door. Engineering things about getting things perfect and fixed. And R&D wants to get things renewed. When we want to have food safety culture, and food safety should be a multidisciplinary team. Everybody in the operation should be focusing on food safety, making sure the food is safe. So, but where there's a challenge though now is that food safety culture scientists we're still working on the definition of food safety culture. I'm part of a group that's GFSI has a technical working group now on food safety culture, and there are a few of us who are who are on this working group who are focusing on food safety, the science of food safety culture, and there's been a call to participate, for industry to participate in a group. And so I just wanted to, in case you didn't know, that's happening from a GFSI perspective. So we're talking about some of the issues that we're having with food safety culture, and one of the challenges that we're facing is that food safety culture means different things to different people. So what I've suggested is that I'm using Shine's definition, that it's the patterns of beliefs or attitudes, the values, the competencies, a learned behavior that's developed over an organization's history and that are manifested in daily activities that impact food safety. So this is the definition that we would want to be using, or that I would want to use. I think that encompasses a lot of things. It gets the idea that it's throughout the organization, it's beliefs, values, competencies, behaviors. And when we're talking about culture, it's not simply, we talk about culture because we don't want simply to have a food safety program. We want people to live and breathe food safety in their work activities. And so that's why Frank has said, as a food safety and quality specialist, or even as a plant operator or a CEO, your job is not to create a food safety program. It's really about creating a food safety culture, a positive food safety culture. This is one of those where you've got a food safety culture, but you want to have a positive, strong food safety culture. So I have a poll here, and we'd like to think about what some of the influences are on a food safety culture in your organization. So Simon, can you bring the poll up? How?
Yeah, I've
you able to do that?
Sorry, Britta. Yeah, I've done that. The poll is running in the sidebar now.
So we got the poll in the sidebar. Yes, I can see that. Okay, the poll's in the sidebar. All right, all right.
Yeah, so, people are voting now.
Yes, how committed is your senior management to food safety? Not committed at all or extremely committed? We've got some 1%, 2%. Oh, so it's good. It's good that we've got not very many at the not at all committed. And it's really great that we've got some who are extremely committed. So yeah, it's about a 30% extremely committed, 29, 28, extremely committed, 21% at number 5, 26% at number 4, 19% at number 3. So number 3 is about halfway, but it's good that we're on the positive side of things. So this is good news for everybody.
It's a good 75% above average. So that is very encouraging.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I'm guessing that you're committed too. The participants online were committed too. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. So exactly. So that's great. We'll move to the next slide if I can. Uh-oh, what have I done here? There we go. Next slide. There we go. So one of the things we're looking at. So we talk about management commitment, senior management commitment to food safety. The reason I wanted to ask you about that is because of the work that I did, the research that I did. I looked at a number of factors that influenced food safety behavior, and on the slide on the top right bubble it says management commitment to food safety. And what I showed in my research that management commitment to food safety is indirectly responsible for worker behavior. So work unit commitment to food safety is really important. That's the predictor of food safety behavior. So without work unit commitment to food safety, it can actually, work unit commitment to food safety can sabotage all the other work that management is doing. So there are different levels that we need to look at when we're looking at what influences behavior and what commitment we need. There's another element of food safety culture and food safety behavior that we want to look at. So this one gives you an overview of how it fits at the organizational level, group or work group level. That's a cultural kind of a thing. When we're talking about individual, we're talking about individual planned behavior. We look at individuals, and individuals are affected by their attitude toward what they're being asked to do. The subjective norms or the norms, that's the cultural kind of perspective. So what are my workmates doing? The perceived behavioral control is what kind of behavior, what kind of control do I perceive that I have over the behavior? If I'm supposed to wash my hands and there's a really long lineup at the hand washing station, or there's no soap or there's no paper towels, then it's going to be really hard for me to do my hand washing when I've also got somebody telling me I need to get back to my workstation. So that's how perceived behavioral control is affected. And then work routines or habits also affects behavior in that if something has become a habit, like if I'm every X number of seconds or minutes I'm dipping my knife into a sterilizer, well, that's a habit. So it just happens. It happens almost automatically as a habit. And so this is how behavior happens at an individual level, because we would intend our behavior based on our attitudes and whatever else is influencing us. And that's a model. Isaac Eisen is the researcher that identified that, and Fishbein. And so what makes food safety culture work, or management commitment work, or all this behavior and climate, what makes this happen? So there are a few things that I've identified, and you probably already know these just intuitively, but sometimes it's good to have it confirmed. So effective leadership is key. So we talked about earlier. I talked about the importance of a multidisciplinary food safety culture team, but it's not, and it's strategic management. I just dropped down the bottom one, strategic management. So senior management to commitment and effective leadership at the senior level is important for a positive food safety culture. But we also need to think about peer leaders. And sometimes we think of leaders only if they've got a title, but a leader is someone to whom people look to for direction and indication of what they should be doing. And so you'll have leaders in your work groups, and those are the people who will be the ones who can influence positively or influence negatively the work that you're trying to do to get changes in terms of food safety behavior. Effective training is important, and the purpose of training is behavior change. And so we want to do training so that we end up having people change their behavior or reinforce the positive behavior that we want. So factors that affect training include whether the employees know the correct actions to take, whether they're motivated, and whether the physical setting is preventing it or giving it shortcut or allowing them to get shortcuts. So I mentioned before about the hand washing stations being appropriate. Effective follow-up is also key. And so follow-up, just as examples of follow-up are observation. We're providing feedback we're observing people. We're providing positive feedback because we're watching what it is that they're doing. We're letting them know what they're doing positively. It's okay to do corrections, not a problem. But what can happen often is that we get so focused on when people do things incorrectly, and we only give feedback when they're doing things incorrectly. If that's the only feedback that they get, that's not a good thing. That doesn't really help people want to do things. Yeah, they'll do it because they have to, because they're getting told they're doing it wrong. But wouldn't it be nice if they got confirmation that they were doing things correctly? And that's a way that they can continue to do things correctly. Then they're sure of what it is that they need to be doing. And having consequences also of incorrect procedures, making sure that there is follow-up and there are consequences for doing it incorrectly. And nicely, if there are good positive consequences if they do things the correct way. If we're looking at issues, then we want to look at root cause of the issue and where does that lie. There's a list of possible root causes there. And I've listed 4 of them as people. Is it management, supervisors, workers, or food safety and quality assurance personnel that are the root cause? Or is it something, as I mentioned before, environment or equipment? Is it something that they don't have control over themselves, that they're trying to work things around, and which is why they didn't do what it was that they were asked. Effective communication is another part. And so when we talk about communication, there's interpersonal communication. I got the idea of interpersonal communication when I talked about feedback, positive feedback in follow-up, but there's also the company-wide communications about what are the priorities, what are company-wide communications about perhaps there may be a initiative that focuses on here's a strategy, a communication strategy that we're going to have that will help to encourage the positive uptake of the information. So that's what we mean by company-wide kind of communication. But it's important, though, to connect with employees as individuals, to have employees, the workers, feel like they're people, not just numbers or a part of a herd that's just pumping out product. And that's important, because when you do that, then that's when you'll get engagement. You'll get them to you get them on your side. You'll get them to be feeling like you care about them, not just about what it is that they're doing. And one way to do that is to encourage feedback and get input from them. So get them to give you ideas. Ask for input about how this could be changed or how that could be improved. You can use suggestion boxes. And there's some other ideas that I'm sure your workplaces, that you have in your workplaces, to generate ideas from employees and get their feedback about how things could be improved and how things could be better. And not only in safety, I mean, it could be safety, it could be production, it could be anything, but also about how can we do food safety activities and initiatives better. And then, so now we're getting to the measuring for food safety. So when we think about measuring for food safety, as a scientist, you know, I could easily think of ways to measure food safety, or factors that influence food safety, factors that affect food safety. So we can talk about indicator organisms. We can talk about pathogens. We can measure those. We can plate them out. We can do, you know, the new techniques and get, you know, get real time PCR kinds of things. Find out where we are with respect to our indicator organisms and potential pathogens. We can also do preemptive things like measuring pH or water activity as a critical control points. We measure time, about what's the length of time that we're going to allow a product to be out, not at room temperature. What's the length of time that we're going to have a product what's the length of time of the temperature? That's right. What's the temperature that we're going to have for the refrigeration system? Is it going to be 4 degrees, or we do want it a little bit lower at maybe 2 degrees? What kind of controls do we have? What kind of measures do we have for that? And then, of course, there's the chemistry of food safety, and what are the, you know, what are the antimicrobial agents that we might put in to the food product that would help to support a safe food product. And so these are the kinds of things we can look at traditionally from a food science perspective. That's easily I can think of that, and we can use that for measuring food safety. When we're thinking about social science, it's a little bit different. And so we have indicators for food safety. We have leading indicators and lagging indicators. Some of the ones that I mentioned before, like indicators of pathogens in finished product, that's a lagging indicator. pH and water activity are leading indicators because we measure those before our product is finished. So leading indicator, lagging indicator is, if you look at it from left to right, the leading indicator is an indicator of food safety before we're putting the product in the package and trying to get it shipped out. So when we're looking, and that's ideally where we want to focus, have our attention focused. This is the preventative part. Leading indicators are what we can do to prevent issues. So we microbial. I'm going from the bottom up on this. We got microbial validations. We can audits. We can do our audits of risk factors. We can do HACCP checks and measures, kind of what I mentioned before in the previous slide. In the social science side of things, this is when we look at behavioral observations. What are the leading indicators? Do we see more people doing more things correctly? Do we see fewer instances of improper handling of X or Y? Have we had an increase in knowledge and competence of our workers? And have we done quantitative or qualitative assessments of culture? These are leading indicators of that would help us. That would help us to say that we'll be able to put out a safer product than if we didn't have those kind of indicators, that we didn't have positive examples of those indicators. Lagging indicators are things like, as mentioned, finished product testing, customer complaints, a lagging indicator, food recalls, foodborne illness outbreaks, and surveillance data. Those are examples of lagging indicators. It's sort of after the fact. So you have a mix of both. Ideally, you focus on the prevention. So preventive control plans are what would you have for them? So that you put preventive control plans in place, and so then you're looking at leading indicators for protecting their product that way. So when measuring food safety culture, I've got another activity for you right here. So measuring food safety culture, who does a measure for food safety culture in your workplace, or which of you do that? So type in the chat box, type in 1 for yes and type in 2 for a no. So if you do anything to measure food safety culture in your workplace, just type that in.
Yeah, just type it directly in the sidebar, just 1 or 2.
One for yes, 2 for no.
Yeah. While they're doing that, Britta, quite a few people have been typing in and saying, well, what key performance indicators could you sort of, we're talking about senior management being interested, showing interest. showing commitment, they need to, you know, be able to see how they're performing in order to, you know, perhaps stimulate some action. What sort of things could be on a senior manager's dashboard in terms of food safety?
So the kinds of things that what senior manager would want to be looking at, a senior manager would want to be able to say, I set an example for food safety. So that's a really, really, really important thing. So when we talked about earlier, I talked about social norms. So if the senior person in the operation goes in, washes his hands, puts, does all the proper stuff, puts on a hairnet, puts on a jacket, washes the hands, goes properly through the foot baths, all that sort of stuff, that person is being watched. They may not know it. They may not know, but the person is being watched. And when the senior official does that, even if that person is not going anywhere near product, that is a clear indication that that's an important thing to do. And so that influences the workers and the perception that the workers have about the importance of food safety. So that's an example right there. Yeah. That's probably that's a classic example of senior management.
So we're all in it together. We're all in it together.
Yeah, that's right. And so the senior manager, if workers are told you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do something else, then a senior manager coming in better not do that, better not do the other thing, better not do something else.
Yeah.
And if workers are supposed to do X, Y, and Z, then the senior manager better do X, Y, and Z, because that's demonstrating your commitment that even though you're not handling food, you're going to be doing it too.
Yeah, perhaps even dipping into even if, you know, like if you have a food safety meeting, an operations meeting every week, and food safety is on the agenda, perhaps dipping into one of them every month or so, you know.
That's right. Attending the food safety team meetings. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
There are a whole bunch of number ones on this. So that's interesting. I'm surprised that there are that many ones.
Yeah. Well, I've just done a quick calculation, and I think it's about 50-50.
Okay. All right. I just a whole bunch of them. So while I'll continue on, but while I continue on, I'd also like you to measure after you've done your ones and twos. So those of you who had written in a one, what do you measure for food safety culture in your workplace? Just, one of the key items that you mentioned that you measure. And for those of you who typed in a 2 for no, what would you measure for food safety culture in your workplace? So you can type those into your into the chat box also. What do you measure, or what would you measure, depending on whether you typed in a 1 or a 2.
Yeah.
And
Go on, Britta, sorry.
Well, while they type that, I was going to go on, but if you had a question, then.
Oh, no, just a couple of comments in the sidebar. Christy said we had an auditor that sat on a table in production, and we had a lot of people come and tell him he couldn't. They thought it was a test, so yes, they are watching.
Yes, exactly. Yes. In fact, I know there was an auditor who purposefully would do things. And see if there was any response. Absolutely, yes. So that was a good thing that somebody said something. Exactly.
Yeah. And one more, Sheen has said, encouraging your workers to pull other people up if they are not following the food safety rules should be encouraged. Yes,
that's right. So peer correction. Yes, exactly. And that's part of what I talked about, peer leadership, right? So that and having open communication and feedback and letting people know that it's really important, that will encourage that openness and that sharing. And because it's a team thing. I mean, if one person on the line does something so that it harms the product, that can affect everybody if the plant has to shut down. So if they put it into that terms, then they can understand it a little bit better. Okay. I mean, if you think about the plants that have had to shut down because of food safety issues. Anyway, so let me continue on then. So So when we're assessing food safety culture, there are different surveys. And so when you're doing a social science approach, you can have a qualitative approach or a quantitative approach. So and I'm simplifying it quite a bit. So I'm doing the extremes so you can see the difference. There are actually models that you can use a combination, but I'm going to separate them out. Qualitative is when you do interviews. So you would interview somebody, you would do an in-depth interview, and by doing an in-depth interview, you would get feedback. It takes a little bit longer, and you can't do as many interviews in the same length of time as you could have people do a written survey. But when you do an interview, you can find out, really get a better idea of what people are thinking and feeling about what their perceptions are. And that can give you some huge insights about what you might be able to do differently to help make changes. Because if you understand the why people are doing things, that can give you a huge amount of information that you wouldn't be able to get from a survey that you circle 1 to 7 or 1 to 5 or something. And so when you do qualitative data analysis, you'll get words and you'll analyze the words and you'll work with those words and you'll get ideas. You'll get themes, what we call themes, and you'll get a picture of what's happening. Not a literal picture, but you'll get an image or an idea in your mind, and you'll put that into words and describe it in words, what it is that the culture is like when we're talking about assessing a food safety culture. So that's what we would use in a qualitative approach. So there's richness to it, there's depth to the answers, and it gives you a totally different perspective than you could get by doing quantitative. A quantitative method will give you numbers, and you can analyze it using statistics. And when you do quantitative stuff, we still use the word food safety culture, but when we're doing a snapshot in time, this is when scientists tend to use the word climate. We're getting individuals' perceptions at a snapshot in time. It's a quantitative kind of a thing. We talk about food safety climate. So the work that I did, the little picture here at the side is an image of the survey that I did. I called it food safety climate, a tool to measure food safety climate. And there are other researchers in Belgium and Netherlands that have referred to a tool to measure food safety climate. So we're being a little bit more precise here because culture is the bigger picture. It's a social kind of a thing, not a numbers kind of a thing. And so it's also climate is a snapshot in time, whereas culture doesn't change. So even if we got a snapshot in time today, we'd get that snapshot in time later. So that would give us an indication of culture. Only over time would we get an idea of it being culture. So that's why we use the different terms. So the diagnostic tools that have been talked about are, like I mentioned, these tools to measure food safety climate. There's a new food safety culture maturity model that Lone Jesperson, who's worked at Maple Leaf Foods, is working on in her PhD, and she's further developing it in over the next year. She'll be working on it. And there's a UK food safety culture diagnostic toolkit for inspectors. I was on a graduate students advisory committee, and a graduate student and a public health inspector student were looking at that toolkit to see how it actually worked and whether it related to food safety culture. And it didn't quite work as well as we had hoped in Canada anyway, in Ontario. But so there were some suggestions made for improving that the survey. It was not a hard and fast numbered kind of a survey. It was more the inspectors would give an indication of what they thought. And then there are a number of different proprietary surveys. And the proprietary surveys, the group of scientists that I'm sitting around, we say, well, okay, well, we've got all these proprietary surveys, but do we know how do we know that they actually measure what they're supposed to measure? So are they reliable and are they valid? So that's the terminology used in science. And from your scientific, because many of you would be food safety scientists or food scientists, you have taken this, you would know that you're looking for something that's reliable and valid. And so not reliable, not valid means it doesn't hit the target and the bullets are all over the place, or the arrows are all over the place. Reliable, it means that it's very clustered in a certain area. The target's very clustered in a certain area. So you're reliably hitting the wrong spot. That's also not measuring what it is that you want to measure. What you really want to be able to do is you want to have something that's reliable and valid. So you're measuring what you want to measure and you're measuring it very well. It's consistent. And so with the proprietary tools that are out there, because they're proprietary, the scientists don't have any idea what they are. We don't know what they are. So and nobody's sharing the information. So we have no idea whether they're reliable or valid. We do know that the tool that I developed and the tool that the Netherlands developed is reliable and valid because with the statistical analysis we did. So when we're thinking about that, are you measuring when your surveys are there? Are you measuring what you mean to measure? And so this is one way that when you do a factor analysis, that's an example of factor analysis coming out. So each one of these columns will shows that there are certain questions. So on the numbers represent questions in a survey. 1, 2 on the left hand side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the top 5, they were connected. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 down to 12 were connected. So they were that group of questions told us that they grouped together, and that factor analysis was really important because that helped us gave us an idea of what work unit, that particular one, what is meant by work unit commitment to food safety. So there were 3 little items that told us what gave us an indication of work unit commitment to food safety. And in this, as I said, the climate tool. And so we've got a range in food safety culture. I mentioned already negative food safety culture to positive food safety culture. When we got a positive food safety culture, management team has strong positive commitment. Everybody makes food safety a high priority. The organization is in compliance with regulations and exceeds expectations, ideally, and is in compliance with the documented system that you have. As opposed to some of the examples of the companies in the beginning of the slide where they were on the left-hand side. So now you've already indicated, many of you indicated about 50-50 that you have a survey. So we've got another poll for you. How would you rate the food safety culture in your workplace? If you think it's you already gave us an indication of management commitment to food safety. And you gave us an indication that about 50 of you say you've measured food safety culture. So even those who didn't measure food safety culture, how would you rate the food safety culture in your workplace? Is it the worst you can think of? I hope not. Best in class? I'd be surprised. But that's possible because I'm not sure where your companies are, where you are with the companies. But it would be interesting to find out how you would rate the food safety culture in your workplace. We've got a lot of ones, a lot of twos. Oh, actually, we got some best in class. Perfect. Yes, because there are some companies who are doing some really good work in food safety culture now. Hershey's is one. I think. Yeah, that's just the one that, and Maple Leaf Foods, as I mentioned. So absolutely. So that's good.
That's a good shape to the poll. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think so. Excellent. All right, and then let me get back to my little slide set here. Okay. So you guys can keep entering that in, and I'll keep going. So, so as I mentioned, so what we're wanting to do is we measure food safety culture / climate. A lot of times, like as I mentioned, it's probably climate that we're measuring. We measure that because we want to see where there are areas that we can improve. So what where are areas we need to improve so that we can be even better at our food safety practices. And so we've got implementing change, so factors to consider to improve food safety culture and behaviors, and the food safety culture leadership system that I've got. That's my flagship program that I've got. And because, as I mentioned in the beginning, I spent a lot of years in leadership and organization development. And so I'm able to bring those together, my food science background and my leadership and organization development background, to have this food safety culture leadership system. So the implementing change, there are key people, and I'm focusing right here on the key people factors. There are other elements that relate to this, that, you know, the resources, the processes, the equipment, but I want to focus on the key people factors. So it was already mentioned, leadership. So we want to measure things that we can influence and have an impact on, in make changes to in leadership, in communications, as I mentioned, interpersonal, community-wide, company-wide communications, in training, and making sure that our training is centered on the learner, that we're focusing on the learner's needs, not just making sure that I cover this information. So what are the learner's needs? What are the objectives? What are the learning objectives that we have for the learner, so that when the learner finishes the course that we're doing, that they're going to be able to do what it is, that have the knowledge that we're asking them to learn, and that they're able to perform differently. They'll be able to improve their performance. So it's learner-centered and performance-based training. And then the other key people factor relates to performance effectiveness. How effective are people in their roles, in their tasks? How competent are they, and how can we improve their competence? How can we improve their effectiveness? And this includes teams also. So it could be as I mentioned, the food safety team, or some companies actually have a food safety culture team. So how are you? What are the goals that those teams have, and how are they achieving those goals? Are they effective at achieving those goals? And have they moved things forward? And to what extent have they moved things forward? And then the food safety culture leadership system I have touches on all of these areas, because those are the areas that I identified through the survey that I validated, that influence worker food safety behavior. And so here's some tips for measurement and improvement. Oh, good. There's right. So tips for measurement and tips for improvement of the things that you're measuring. Measure what's important. And so, you know, it seems like a silly statement, but sometimes things get measured just because it's easy to measure them. So sometimes measuring what's important is not it's going to have to take extra effort to measure what's important, because it's not an easy way to measure it. If you want to get perceptions of leaders and perceptions of leadership, you want to measure the level of commitment. We talked about management commitment and how that's expressed. So a level of commitment would be that a leader leader not only perceives that the leader does all the things that he or she is supposed to do, but that other people perceive that also. It's not good enough for somebody to self-report, for me to say, oh yes, of course I wash my hands when I go through the plant, if I'm a senior leader. Well, who's watching me, and how is that being measured? Are other people aware that I actually don't do it? So that's what I mean by this level of commitment. And measuring communication and the effectiveness of communication, and measuring how aware people are of the risks that they have, the risk that's associated with the particular job that they have, the food safety risk. Some companies actually put in safety, occupational health and safety also. So there's, in that case, you might even add that to it. Some companies actually combine the two. And then also measure the resources and processes, and so the effectiveness of the resources and processes. it's also useful if you're specific in some of the measurements. So if you, for example, you may have a goal for 0 critical non-compliances. You don't want to have any critical non-compliances in an audit or an internal audit or an external audit or inspection. You just want to have 0 because that's just really bad to have. Because if you're strongly focused on food safety, you should have picked that up before it even became minor. You want to establish a baseline and measure changes. And in order to establish baseline and measure changes, you need to get support to write and review the questions, because if you're writing questions, that you would not believe how difficult it is to get a question worded correctly, and you have to pre-test. There's a whole rigmarole around that. Sometimes it's, I would say, it's so much easier to work in a lab because microbes don't give me problems. So when you're trying to measure things, you've got to do a good job on writing the questions and then reviewing the questions and getting them correct. And it's even more difficult if you need to translate. More complicated system to go through for that. And then also you want to get support for analyzing and interpreting the data, because if you're not used to doing social science research. The other thing that you want to do when you're doing measures is you want to keep track of the cost for return on investment. You want to know what are the direct costs, the indirect costs, and the cost savings for the results of the change. That's really important, because if you're going to need to argue for resources in the future, you need to know that information. So probably the most important parts of this slide are the bottom half. Establish baseline, measure changes, getting support, and keep track of costs for ROI. So just a summary for your thoughts, for my thoughts. It's just 11 o'clock now, just over time. So I'd like you guys to think about, and not wanting to write this in the chat box. I want you to think about it, write it down yourself. What are the key issues in your workplace with respect to food safety culture? What needs to change? And what are you going to do in the next 3 months as a result of this webinar? You just spent an hour on this webinar. You don't want it to be a waste of your time. You want to identify what it is that you're going to do to make a difference using the information that you learned today. So that's it. Here's my contact information. So if anybody has any questions, you can follow, or you can email me, and I can get back with you.
Excellent, Britta. Thanks. You can stop sharing your slides now. My word, I think we've almost broke the chat in the sidebar. It's been scrolling that fast. I've got a question here that literally we could spend probably about an hour discussing, because it's quite a profound question. Is it possible to be food safety compliant? In other words, you've got a GFSI certification, but have a poor food safety culture?
Yes, and this is where I have at the meeting that I went to, food safety scientist meeting, I explained this to the group, that people can be following procedures, doing everything that they need to be doing because they are so fearful of the manager, the supervisor that's yelling and screaming at them. And so they're doing everything that they can to not get that negative reinforcement. And so they don't have a good food safety culture. A good food safety culture will be one that you don't have to have a supervisor there, and people will still follow what it is they're supposed to do. They don't need to be told all the time. So absolutely, you can have a really good score on your audits, on your inspections, anything like that, and not have a strong positive food safety culture.
Yeah, and I suppose actually this is where unannounced audits come in, that you can have a poor food safety culture, but you can with 2 months to prepare yourself, you can get in ship shape. But with unannounced audits, you have to be audit ready 24/7, don't you? And that's where GFSI standards are going, which is a good thing to drive culture, food safety culture, good food safety culture.
Yeah, and again though, you can still have everything ship shape and clean without having it in the sense of ownership to food safety ingrained in people. People have to believe and understand and be confident that they can that they can follow through on the expectations, and they do follow through on expectations of following the procedures that they're supposed to follow, whether anybody's around or not. And if you've got, if you're in a situation, if you're in a workplace where people are doing things out of fear, fear of losing their job, or just because they're just being told what to do and they're not being asked to think about the implications of their actions on food safety. They're not aware of the risk that they have to the product. Then they're not thinking beyond what it is that they're asked to do, and they may not then understand if they do something differently, even slightly differently, that it could have a negative impact on food safety. And so that's where I say behavior, doing correct actions doesn't mean that you have a strong positive culture of food safety, a strong positive impression that you're doing the right thing in food safety.
Yeah, I suppose you could expand. We're talking about food safety culture, but in general, it's a company. I mean, food safety, quality, efficiency, reducing waste. All of that goes with a good culture within a company. So not only not only by having a good culture are we preventing cost avoidance, where recalls and complaints and things, but we're actually probably going to be a much more efficient, proactive, and a better business all round.
That's right. And in fact, there was a study done by a health and safety, occupational health and safety researcher, where they did an intervention for health and safety in a food plant, and the quality of the product that the plant produced improved, and they were focusing on health and safety. So it's connected. That kind of thing is connected.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've run over. The last thing, a couple of things we're going to do is that, I mean, this is an hour. We're trying to shoehorn a lot into 1 hour, and I know we're thinking about doing perhaps a longer webinar, perhaps a 4-hour half-day one that would be a paid one. But if anybody, please just have a look in the sidebar there, and there are some possible ideas for topics or other ideas you can type in the chat box, or even if you're not interested, just put not interested at all. They are great, the little nuggets, and people do learn from these 1 hour short blasts, but we can't go into the depth really that perhaps we need to show some examples of how we measure culture, actually practically, and using some of those tools. So just put your comments in the sidebar. While they do that, Britta, I'll follow you up with that later. I'd just like to say thanks very much for today. Again, it's been a great session on behalf of myself, the IFSQN, and all the attendees today at Food Safety Fridays. I'm sure they got a lot out of it. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, and we'll be seeing you again in a few more weeks, I think, at Food Safety Fridays. In June.
June, yes.
Okay, well, I'll be in touch soon, and take care. Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, bye all.
Okay. Ladies and gents, I'm going to load your certificate in the sidebar. You can click on that, the download now button, when it appears, and that'll take you to a web page where you should be able to download your certificate, print it off, sign it yourself, and put that in your continued personal development pack. And next time you have an audit, show the auditor that you're continually learning and growing and expanding your knowledge and keeping on improving. That's what it's all about. So thanks everybody for your attendance today and your input. It's been absolutely brilliant on the polls and the chat. It's fantastic to see you all interacting with each other and with the presentation. So hopefully we'll see you for Kathy's webinar next Friday, same time. We'll get the slides and video in a follow-up email within 24 hours. And I'll send also a link to the chat because it's a big long chat and you might want to pick through that. So thanks very much. It's Friday, so happy Friday to you. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you all again next week. Okay, take care.